right, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me and see me, and most importantly, see my slides. And I'm gonna get right to it. I can see your questions in the chat, and I'm probably gonna wait to address them until the end. But if there's anything pressing, like you don't hear a word of what I'm saying, then do let me know. My name is L Plass, and I'm a professor of digital media and learning sciences at New York University. Have been doing research on digital technologies for learning for the past 25 years. I do this kind of work in the context of a research lab that is called CREATE, that I direct, where we invent, design, and then study the future of digital learning. And in the context of the Games for Learning Institute, which is a consortium of universities to study the effectiveness of games for learning and how they need to be designed to be effective for learning. So what I want to talk about today is one of the things that we've learned in this research, which is designs to make EdTech more effective for learning by using emotion. And so I want to give a brief introduction, then ask the question, why should we care about emotion? And then talk about emotional design, a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, because I think it makes every product better, and then talk about 5 emotional design methods. So we have, in the past 20 years, done a number of research, different research and development projects. For example, this project with Stephen Hawking on life in the universe, where we built a multimedia experience around it. This exhibit at the New York Hall of Science here in New York City, where you learn about the water cycle and in general about systems thinking in an intergenerational way. We've designed games to learn about artificial intelligence together with game design studios, such as here Filament Games. We're looking at virtual reality for middle school science learning and how learners can collaborate to learn about mitosis in this case, or about how viruses attack cells and how viruses replicate. We've also done research on designing games and have designed games that are available in the App Store and on Google Play for free to train your cognitive skills, your executive functions, with this game called All You Can Eat Tea. This is called Guacamole, and this is called Crush Stations. We used the results from this research in projects like Project Hope, where we went and did a 4-week intervention with Syrian refugees in Turkey to see whether we could help them gain the kind of skills that they lost because they weren't able to attend school. And so when we do these kind of designs, we ask a lot of questions about which types of designs makes enhances the effectiveness of our products. And for this, I want you to have a look at the following graphics, and I want you to ask yourself, what do you think the most striking difference between these designs is? Have a look at this design versus this design, or this design versus this design, or this. And now I hope people won't be squeamish with my next one, or that design. So what is it? What is the most striking difference among those? And the last one, by the way, was appendicitis surgery, where we worked with our medical school to train surgeons to know how to perform the surgery. So what is the most striking difference among those environments? Is it the content? Was it the genre of what we were looking at? Or perhaps was it the emotional impact that they had? And I think everybody must have felt something like that. The abstract to realistic, of course, is another possibility as well. But that is actually one way of designing for emotional impact. And when we look at the psychology of emotions, there are a number of different emotions that we're experiencing, and we're experiencing all the time. I'm experiencing emotions right now. I'm sure you are. I hope they are more along the lines of enjoyment and happiness, and not boredom and frustration. But that's what our learners experience all the time. And there's a huge discussion still in the scientific community whether they're primary and secondary emotions and which ones those are. But that's actually not all that important to us. What matters to us is that the limbic system that is responsible for the processing of emotions, that is the seat of emotion, but also of memory and attention, and it's comprised of the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala, that this system is so deeply connected to neocortical functions meaning the processing of information, that what we think abstract thinking or rational thinking, it is so deeply connected to that that we actually cannot separate feeling and thinking, emotion and thinking. And researchers in emotional neuroscience now would actually go as far as saying that none of these parts of the limbic system, even though we describe them as the seat of emotion, purely process emotion, they also process cognitive processing, thinking and problem solving, and the other way around. What we thought were just thinking and problem solving parts of the brain also process emotion. So we cannot separate them. What we have learned over the years that positive affect, positive emotions, when we experience them, actually signals that our needs are taken care of and that other goals can be addressed. So we're in a state of coasting. And that has a broaden and build effect, meaning we now feel the freedom to create, to be creative and to solve problems and to come up with a number of different ideas, so that it induces creativity and pro-social behavior when we're experiencing positive affect. Compare that with negative affect, which signals that particular needs or goals need to be addressed, they're not met. And here it has a narrowing effect, and we're less creative, we're less willing to enjoy other ideas or other options or other opinions. And so negative affect is something that helps us solve the problem in the moment, but we're not very broad in doing so. So when we look at the affective emotions, then they're essential for decision making. And a positive mood is an effective retrieval cue. It helps us remember things, increases creativity, which we just talked about. It also leads to more positive judgments or more positive feedback when it comes to a product or a person. It facilitates intrinsic motivation. So we're now intrinsically motivated to actually do something. And as we have shown in our research, it also supports learning. And so when we look at emotional design, then we define that as the use of a range of design features with the goal to enhance, to induce particular emotions in learners to enhance learning. So the goal is to induce those emotions to enhance learning and be targeted about it, and to say, what kind of qualities of learning materials, what kind of what we call affective qualities can we use? And those are the qualities that are able to cause changes in core affect, cause changes in somebody's emotional design. And that's what I would like to talk about today. So if we can induce the kind of emotions that reduce to all these positive outcomes, then we have a better product, and we're able to make it more enjoyable, and thereby opening cognitive resources and opening opportunities and the enjoyment for the product itself. So what are those design factors? We have emotional design factors through visual design, through interaction design, through playfulness, through poses, and through sound. And I want to talk about those a little bit today and focus on perhaps the first one with the visual design. Here we've done a lot of research that shows that warm colors and round shapes induce positive emotions. So when you have a look at these graphics here, you see when we look at the different types of colors in the color wheel, that there's some of the warmer colors versus some of the cooler colors. If we design more with warm colors, we induce positive emotions. You see that this image in the middle, this is one of our games, Crustaceans. We use some warm colors, but of course not everything can be a warm color. They stick out if not everything is. We also see that round shapes are more effective than square shapes or other shapes in inducing positive emotions. In fact, there are some shapes that by design induce negative emotions because they have so jagged edges, etc. And so what we did in one study, and what you see on the right, there are all these different types of game characters that we designed, where we used round shapes and square shapes and warm colors and neutral colors. And we used also their facial expressions. You see that the game characters have different types of facial expressions. So if you have a game, you can use that as well. But in many EdTech products, we wouldn't have a game. So that's not the primary feature of visual design. But even the dimensionality, you see the top block is two-dimensional, is flat design. The bottom block is three-dimensional design, and that can have an effect on emotion as well. So we know then from our research that those round shapes and warm colors positive affect emotion and enhance and actually increase learning outcomes. So just in a game like this, for instance, just to look at these game characters, here the green and the orange game characters that in this case need to be fed with milkshakes or cupcakes, if we replace those game characters that you see on the left, the orange and the green ones, with square ones that are in black and white on the right, and thereby creating a hot version of the game that induces those positive emotions, and a cool version of the game that doesn't, we find better performance and better outcomes in the hot version of the game, especially with older learners and learners who had low cognitive skills. And this is a game to induce to strengthen your cognitive skills, your executive functions. So just the change of those game characters resulted in significantly better outcomes for the learners who got them compared to the learners who got those black and white and square colors. This is something that we have replicated as an effect in a number of different studies and has been replicated by other labs. So the effect of emotional design using visual design is something that now has been studied and has been showing positive effects. Another example for interaction, for emotional design, is through the design of interactions. And that is something that, of course, every EdTech application has had, the interactions that you design. And for those who remember Angry Birds on the top right, there's this really enjoyable, very simple mechanic of putting a bird on the sling and pulling that sling back. And that sling mechanic itself is probably what got most people addicted to Angry Birds. And so that is interaction design, right? The enjoyable nature of that. And we call that situational interest in education and psychology. Situational interest is that the activity you're performing right now with your EdTech application is one that interests you, that excites you, that is enjoyable. And that situational interest might actually be for an activity where you don't have an individual interest. I might not like math, but I really like this particular math game. I have a high situational interest for this math game. And in time, research has shown that situational interest in a math game actually results in individual interest in math. If you had enough experiences where you enjoyed the activity doing math in a well-designed app or game or well-designed website, you can, over time, start enjoying math as well. And so whether that is through the design of guided activities, whether it is focused on the task design itself, if we design for interactions in a way that those themselves become enjoyable, they induce the positive emotions we talked about and can have the same positive results and effects that I've discussed earlier as far as broadening of the cognitive resources is concerned. Here's an example for the game where we did that. The game is called Zodiac and was designed by Filament Games in collaboration with my Create Lab at NYU. And so here you have in the center the golden pig, and the golden pig has to traverse all these nodes in order to discover data and other items within the nodes and fight the corruption around it. And the way the golden pig opens, the way that interaction is performed is very nicely done and is inducing this kind of positive emotion. The same way in another game that we designed, this is the all-you-can-eat game to train executive functions. Here you see that we're actually appropriating a shooter mechanic, which one usually wouldn't do in a learning game, but we are not actually shooting an alien, we're feeding the alien. So we're reappropriating a mechanic that is a very enjoyable mechanic. Everybody likes to shoot things, point a laser, but that doesn't necessarily have to mean that that is a destructive force. So we're using it as a force to feed. And of course, in this case, I fed the alien the wrong food, and you get the response. You see that the alien turns red and has a tear in their eye. That is now using a visual design feature to induce emotion. And in this case, the emotion that don't do that again. This is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to focus on which food that alien needs to get, because that's the whole point of the game. So interaction design combined with the visual design to induce emotions. Another item, and you see I'm talking a lot about games for learning, but playfulness is not limited to games. In fact, playfulness is what enhances almost every aspect of our lives. And so when we think about the design, even of simulations on the top right, those are simulations we designed for science learning, and they're also in the App Store for free. They're called Stat Sims. And those science learning simulations are playful in that when I want to take a sample, which is sampling on the right-hand side, those items are coming in from the top as if somebody pours them in. And if I change the sample, the bottom is getting pulled out and the items are falling out and flushed away. All of those are animated features that induce playfulness, that gives you a playful feeling, even though it is not a game. And so the idea that I can use playfulness in any kind of learning environment, in any kind of situation where I build an EdTech application, or really any application, is something that has been found to induce the same kind of positive emotions we've talked about, and thereby taking advantage of their effects on outcomes. So I make it playful, it is more enjoyable, and therefore I have the kind of outcomes that I'm hoping for, and enhance them without doing anything in addition. So playfulness is something that we have found can be applied to any kind of EdTech product by using animation, by using very small design changes that we would in the game world would call polish, where we really care about the user experience. And I'm not exclusively doing research on games. We're also doing virtual reality and other environments and explore how they can be used for learning. But the one thing that we have learned from games is that the focus on the user's experience in the games is something that we can learn for other environments as well. So the game designers focus on that polish, on making that experience the best and perfect experience, is something that when we look at other educational technology products, we often don't have the same focus. But if we did, we could get the same kind of benefits. So playfulness as one of the 5 ways of inducing emotional design. Another one that is actually surprising in some ways are poses. Research has shown that there are power poses where if you have even your body, your gestures in an open, high power design, as you see on the right, like you would use in some games that are able to detect your motions, or in some apps, those kind of poses induce more positive emotions than the low power design on the left, when your arms are close and you're very tight and you're not in this expansive physical pose as well. So we know from embodied design and embodied cognition that the body and the thinking are related. And so we actually see that here in this kind of research, that it also applies to the body and emotional connection. So if you have the opportunity to design something that doesn't always require to hold the phone like the person on the left is showing, but has kind of the opportunities to have gestures like on the right, if that is part of what you could do with your design, then that would be a useful thing. And even if it were just to take a break and do that as an activity. And finally, and that shouldn't come as a surprise, sound has an incredible effect on emotion. And we, of course, have to consider sound as part of the emotional design as well. And here are a number of different features that we're actually studying in our research, where we're asking what kind of music genre or level of pleasantness or dimensionality when it comes to mono, stereo, or 3D spatial audio, which we can use in virtual reality. How does the sound and specific features within the sound affect outcomes? And you notice I'm not saying music, even though I say musical genre. So this is not necessarily a soundtrack that has to run in the background, which sometimes works as an ambient sound, but it's also the question of what sound effects I'm using and how they sound and what kind of emotion they induce in us. And I'm just glancing at the chat, and somebody's asking the impact of smell. And that is a really interesting question. The reason why we haven't studied it is because in the digital space, smell is still a rather rare modality of information that we're conveying. And so it hasn't really come up, but it's only a question of time for that to be a big part of virtual reality environments where there's actually smell. And in that sense, we will definitely incorporate that into our design as well. So one of those, having talked about all the different ways of inducing emotion, I want to just, being a researcher and designer, I just want to add one more thing that is important, which is if you decided to do that as a company, and if you decided to induce emotions in a systematic way in your game or app or a tech product, then we do need methods for validating the emotional design. We need methods for showing that the emotions that we thought were encountered actually were encountered. And we can measure emotions using surveys. The PANAS is the positive and negative affect scale. That's one of the standard measures that we give learners after the experience to report their emotions. We use think aloud protocols where they speak while they're using the product, they verbalize everything that comes to mind. And we often find that those verbalizations include a lot of emotions. We did a study on that where we compared a 2D versus a virtual reality experience. And we just looked at unprompted emotions and found that there were a lot of those utterances that learners made about their emotions. We can use behavioral responses in the learners through observations or video analysis, especially facial recognition, facial analysis that we can do for emotion. There are biophysiological responses through skin conductance or EEG, for example. And then, of course, eye tracking and the gaze patterns that we can do in eye tracking, including pupillometry that reveals emotion. So there are a number of different options. None of them are perfect, but if you triangulate and combine them, they can be effective. And of course, you would combine them with user logs and the user log analysis. So all of that I wanted to convey today is that emotions are inseparable from cognition and decision making, and they need to be considered during the design process. And emotional design is how we refer to the use of design features that impact learners' emotions with the goal of enhancing learning. And when I say learning, I really mean outcomes, because learning is something that we define very broadly, and it could be a number of different types of learning outcomes. And the 5 ways of applying emotional design are only some ways and some methods of how to do that. And in the chat, there were already other methods mentioned. And if you are interested in more research, here's a shameless plug for a book that we came out with just recently, Handbook of Game-Based Learning, in which we summarize some of our research and that of our colleagues. And with that, I want to thank you and jump straight into answering some questions. So scrolling back up, hello to everyone. And just looking, can we trigger positive emotions to help with sales? Yes, we don't do research on that because we are more interested in learning than in sales, but very clearly a good salesperson or a good sales approach knows to use emotions. And the biggest question really that people in sales have to deal with is whether they should use positive or negative emotions. So for instance, the insurance industry has long decided that inducing negative emotions, so fear and worry, or anxiety even, are a better way of getting people to purchase their product. So it's a question of what the product is and which emotion is more conducive with people actually purchasing it. Laura's question about an assessment of emotion, I think I responded to. Software to recognize facial expression is something that we've also used. It's a little problematic in virtual reality, but it works for other environments. Self-assessments are often, certainly as part of the design process, a much faster way and cheaper way of doing it. So when we do user research, we usually use the much faster way of doing that, and in just self-reports, either verbally or in surveys. Niels is talking about poses in virtual reality designs. That is absolutely what I was thinking about. So we can definitely use the power poses, the more open poses in those environments, and we should. And I agree with Paul, and with Niels, there's definitely a space for smells coming up very soon. Some movie theaters already tried it. I think there was decades ago smell tests where you got a little palette and you had to rub your finger and you had to hold that up against your nose. So there are different ways of doing that. Somebody wanted to know about the book. This is called the Handbook of Game-Based Learning. And the editors are myself, Jan Plass, Richard Mayer, and Bruce Homer. So Handbook of Game-Based Learning. Thank you for that. And yes, creating inclusive environments is actually a very interesting challenge because there are individual differences in emotion, and the biggest key to unlock inclusiveness in your design is to have be inclusive when you sample research participants for your user research, right? So that you already have a inclusive sample that represents your potential target audience in a way that is not just convenient sampling, but a purposive sample for that. If you wanted to connect with me, my email is here, and I will, oops, I don't know what that was. And I will also head over to the lounge to connect with you there if you're interested. Okay. Unless there are any other questions, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'll head over to the lounge, and if you are interested, we can chat more there. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming.